Hi everyone, and welcome to this Global Web Index webinar for IPG, in which we'll be exploring the commerce landscape in Asia Pacific. My name is Chase Buckle, and I'm the Senior Trends Analyst at Global Web Index. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Chris.
Hey everyone, I'm Chris, Trends Analyst here at Global Web Index. So before we get stuck into the webinar, we're just going to briefly take you through who we are as a company and through the methodology behind all the figures we'll be presenting today. Global Web Index is a consumer profiling company, and along with many of the products, we run the world's largest ongoing study on the digital consumer. Within this ongoing research, each year we survey over 400,000 internet users aged 16 to 64 in 45 markets around the world. This research represents around 2.6 billion internet users.
That's right, and on every one of those respondents, we were able to cross-analyze more than 25,000 different data points, building an unparalleled understanding of the modern digital consumer. So we do this to investigate their digital lives. So everything from their attitudes and interests, online activities, social media usage, media consumption, and brand engagement, among many other things.
We aim to provide marketers with an end-to-end solution to create powerful insights that move. Using our platform, marketers can segment their target audience based on these 25,000 data points, quantify their perceptions, and understand what they're doing online or offline, and on which platforms they're doing it. And using our GWIQ campaign effectiveness analytics, we can even match these respondents' self-reported data with their real-world browsing behaviors and advertising exposures online.
Okay, so today we're looking at the APAC digital consumer. APAC, of course, is referring to the Asia Pacific region. Many of the trends we'll be looking at today originated from or are being driven by China. And on a sheer numbers basis, China is the dominant force in the region. Just over half of internet users in the APAC countries we track are from China. But we shouldn't forget there are different demographics and profiles to each market.
That's right. We've got the English-speaking countries of Australia and New Zealand, through Japan and South Korea with their more mature market profiles. And then you've got the fast growth economies like Vietnam and Thailand, sometimes called the Tiger Cubs.
Now, one of the things which makes APAC special is the rapid growth in its middle class in the past decade, which has created a new set of consumers with money to spend. China is at the heart of this, having added millions of consumers with disposable income to its economy in the past decade. The World Bank reports an 8-fold increase per capita income since the turn of the century.
But it's one thing to have the money, but what makes the new digital consumer in APAC so appealing, and something which we can uniquely bring to light in our data, is their attitude towards money and spending it. APAC is only behind Latin America for wanting to try new products and considering themselves much more affluent than average, and far ahead of the rest for feeling positive about the global economy. North America and Europe at the bottom seem to be feeling the squeeze much more, but consumers in APAC see the good times lasting for a little while longer.
But this is a behavior that the Chinese government is looking to tap into as they look to move the country from a manufacturing-led to a consumption-led economy. Jack Ma, CEO of Alibaba, summarized it quite well in Alibaba an event in 2017 when he said that China is shifting from exporting to importing.
Or in other words, China's focusing more now on the products it can bring in for its consuming class, not just what it can send out to the rest of the world.
Exactly. And this will be a huge impetus behind the trends in this region. But alongside this macroeconomic change, there's something to be aware of on the micro level. A potential barrier to a consumption-led economy coming from consumer mentality. We've seen already that APAC consumers are confident about money and they're ready to try new products as well, but there's something else in their profile to be aware of. Consumers in APAC have a greater tendency to put their money into savings instead of spending it. So as before, we can see that APAC outstrips other regions for its consumers' willingness to invest. We can also cross-reference this with another data point, namely which investments consumers actually hold. And here we can see too that the APAC consumer is ahead. So APAC consumers have an average just under 2 forms of investment each, including not just savings, but also stocks and shares, mutuals, bonds, and others as well. In analyzing these data points together, we can see that while the APAC digital consumer benefits from the underlying growth in the region, it has a confident attitude towards saving money and spending. This has to be considered alongside their tendency to invest or save rather than spend.
How much is this a traditional attitude, though? Are younger internet users following their parents' footsteps, or are they breaking away?
Well, it's a good question because it looks like it may be changing. China's levels of consumer savings are among the highest in the world, but 16 to 24s are much less likely to say that they are proactive investors than their older counterparts in APAC. So you tend to see this story across most world regions, that the youngest internet users are less likely to say that they're proactive investments. But in APAC, the gap between 16 to 24s and the broader online population is so pronounced as to suggest that they have a markedly different attitude to finances than their parents. And despite all of that, it seems like the luxury market is finding reasons to celebrate in the region.
That's right. Even though many internet users there are savvy investors, APAC has become a pillar of the luxury market. According to a 2017 white paper drawn up by Sekou, Tencent, and Deloitte, China is now the second biggest luxury market in the world. Within our data, we can profile luxury buyers in some detail. From the brand extension to our survey, we can create an audience of those who've bought any of the luxury fashion brands we track from a list of 67. China and India have the biggest proportion of luxury buyers in APAC, with Vietnam and Hong Kong following closely behind. Australia and New Zealand are towards the bottom of this list, with only around half as many classed as luxury buyers.
Well, if you take a deeper look at China, we get a sense of how different this market is, especially the luxury market. It's not just that Chinese internet users are frequent luxury buyers, they're also a new type of luxury buyer, one distinct from their peers around the world. The average age of a luxury buyer in China is 33, whereas in more mature markets, the average age hovers around 40 years old.
I guess a lot of that has to do with the average age of internet users there.
Very true, but there are practical implications for luxury brands to be aware of. For one thing, luxury buyers in APAC have different expectations of brands compared to the global picture. Elsewhere in the world, particularly in North America, customer service is a big deal. In APAC, though, it's below the rest of the world and is almost level with consumer desires for practical apps and online services. There's a whole host of things to say about this, but fundamentally, it shows off this new type of luxury consumer, young, tech-savvy, and someone who wants brands to provide a treasured experience online, not just offline. We'll come to the nuts and bolts of tech in APAC e-commerce in a moment, but first, Chris is going to take you through product categories and which ones could be in line for growth in the region.
Thanks, Chase. So, thanks largely to China, the luxury market is in good health overall in the region. There are some product categories we found trail the global average and may present an opportunity. In our dataset, we break purchases down into major and minor purchases. Where APAC consumers don't lag behind is in these major purchases, categories like cars, TVs, laptops, and vacations. Here, APAC consumers are buying just as much as, if not more than, their peers in other regions. So China's among the biggest car and laptop buyers in our dataset, with India following closely behind. Geography plays an important role in travel, though. Among our APAC countries, Singapore and Hong Kong are most likely to be buying vacations abroad. No huge surprise given their small size. China and South Korea, on the other hand, are most likely to be buying a domestic vacation. Where we do see interesting disparities is in minor purchases, particularly for CPG products. Looking at the product types where APAC is most behind the global average, we see nearly all of them fall into the CPG category, whether it's personal care, food and drink, or healthcare and pharma. And this is in line with the macro trends we discussed before about how much of the region is moving from manufacturing to consuming as the engine of their economies. Products like these might be fitting within a consumer's budget for the first time.
We're looking at some of the data points here, like pet food, for example. You'd think that cultural factors could have a role to play.
You certainly have to keep it in mind. Just last year, Weetabix encountered complications in China because their product wasn't effectively adapted to the market and their eating habits. So we can't assume that APAC consumers will instantly become westernized in their consuming habits, as it were, just because they have more money to play with. But it's still worth pointing out the areas where brands have most to gain.
Well, I think we should pause for a moment here and let's assume that these product categories grow and get closer to the global average. What are the logistics needed to make this happen? So for starters, navigating the particular payments landscape in APAC is absolutely crucial. It's one thing to identify which industries may be in line to grow in the region, but it's another step to understand how consumers might pay for those goods. Now, it's well known how mobile-centric e-commerce in APAC is. With the exceptions of Japan, Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand, mobile is the dominant e-commerce device. Mobile is an important offline tool for e-commerce as well, with consumers often using smartphones to pay through mobile payment apps. There are a number of reasons why this is the case. High levels of smartphone penetration over PCs and relatively low levels of credit card ownership are prime examples.
Well, on that point, in some cases, financial infrastructures across APAC markets are relatively undeveloped compared to Western ones. So like you say, credit cards often have less of a presence in consumer payment habits. But this is actually something which has helped fuel the growth of mobile payments in this region. This late mover advantage has allowed these markets to leapfrog Western ones into becoming pioneers for alternative payments. From a global perspective, the lion's share of growth we've seen in mobile payment uptake has come from APAC.
Well, China in particular has established itself a name as a mobile payments hub. At one point, this largely cash-driven society quickly adopted mobile payments as they proved more convenient, and in many cases, they offered loyalty reward schemes, which crucially help people save money. So similar to what we've seen in other fast growth markets, the strong growth in internet penetration in Chinese society led to online behaviors being shaped during the proliferation of major contemporary trends, such as universal adoption of social media, widespread smartphone ownership, and also the widespread uptake of online shopping. And that's partly, for example, why we've seen social commerce take off. So as such, consumers here were happy to begin paying with their mobile without the sticking points of consumer trust and reservations, which we typically see in Western markets, where online activities are generally more established and trust towards new forms of technology like mobile payments is often lower than it is in APAC.
Yep, and China is one of 3 markets in our chart here, which exceeds even the APAC average, with India and South Korea posting the strongest scores of all. India's demonetization initiative in 2016 certainly impacted the growth of mobile payments there. What's really important to note is that the top mobile payment services in both India and China are not only device agnostic, but they also require little in the way of technology for the merchants to begin adopting them. That means that their addressable market is potentially extremely large, and that puts them in stark contrast to the likes of Apple Pay and Google Pay in the West.
Well, the growth of mobile payments in the region has resulted in some fierce competition, with a number of players tossing their hat in the ring. There are a number of rivalries at work here, and Western companies have a presence, with PayPal coming on top, not just in the English-speaking countries of Australia and New Zealand, but also in the Philippines and Thailand as well. But PayPal will be looking over its shoulder at Alipay, which is #1 in China and Hong Kong, and it's looking to spread across Southeast Asia.
Alipay is obviously in fierce competition with WeChat Pay in China. So where does WeChat Pay fit into this picture?
Well, Alipay holds a narrow advantage over its rival in China and in Hong Kong as well, and both services are looking to grow into countries, especially around the Southeast Asia region. But for the time being, many countries in the hotly contested Southeast Asia region see a local provider come in first place, which is a testament to the importance of knowing market-specific conditions, if nothing else. Now, I want to quickly dive into one of these markets in particular, which is Indonesia. In Indonesia, GoPay is currently king, which is an impressive achievement given it only launched just over 2 years ago. Now, GoPay is a payment service which spun off of the Gojek app. The Gojek app began life as a ride-hailing service, but has now evolved to be a one-stop shop platform for food and other retail services as well. And what I think this demonstrates is how mobile payment services really thrive when they lock users into an ecosystem. This has been a hallmark of how Chinese services have grown, with WeChat Pay spinning off of the social platform with the same name and Alipay tying in with other financial services too. And let's not forget that these services at the early stages were both closely related to the ride-hailing services in China as well. The companies in other markets are taking notice, and so the near future of mobile payments in APAC might not be a case of Chinese dominance.
Gojek and Grab started out as transport providers, but now have a seat at the mobile payments table in their bid to become super apps in their countries, as WeChat did in China. Even if we look at other markets in APAC outside of Southeast Asia, It's quite striking how quickly the competitive landscape is changing in the mobile payments industry. Two great examples of this are Hong Kong and Taiwan. In the last year alone, we've seen some major shifts in both of these markets.
Well, Hong Kong is a particularly interesting case. It was covered by Bloomberg at the time as well. And not only is Hong Kong a conventionally very open society to Western brands, but its financial infrastructure is actually more similar to that seen in Western markets too, with, for example, a high credit card penetration.
As late as Q3 2017, Apple Pay was the top service in Hong Kong. But fast forward to Q2 2018, and Apple Pay now sits behind those Chinese brands, Alipay and WeChat Pay. Apple Pay has also struggled to fend off APAC-based rivals in Taiwan too, with Line Pay having beaten out Apple Pay to the top spot in the same time period. This is going to be one of the key spaces to watch in the next year, and there's a few dimensions to this. One is from observing the competition between global services and local services, and the other is from observing the competition between Chinese brands like Alipay or WeChat Pay and the Western services, for example, Apple Pay or Google Pay.
Nice. So we're talking about what to look out for in the year ahead. So that leads us nicely onto voice technology. Voice assistants are primed to make a significant impact in the e-commerce landscape, particularly in APAC. But before we get into the details of what lies ahead of voice and how this might affect consumer shopping behaviors, let's get some background. So APAC consumers stay true to their digitally forward characteristic when it comes to voice tech. They're among the most likely in the world to be using voice technology each month, particularly on their mobiles. Since we began tracking smartphone voice assistant usage in Q2 2017, we've seen a lot of growth, around 25% growth rate in APAC. So compared to regions like Europe, where just 16% use smartphone voice assistants each month, APAC is way ahead.
Well, strong attachment to smartphones in this region in general has no doubt been a contributing factor in the impressive figures we see here for mobile voice uptake. Something which serves as a strong example of mobile's role in scaling voice assistant engagement is in the rate of those who are planning to purchase a new smartphone. 2/3 of consumers in APAC say they plan to purchase a new mobile or upgrade their existing handset in the next 12 months. In China, as many as 3/4 of consumers say they plan to do this in the next year, with India and Vietnam also posting equally strong scores. And when we consider that the majority of mid to premium end smartphones in the market have integrated voice assistants, this certainly gives us a promising outlook on the future growth of voice in the APAC region.
Well, we need to also bear in mind here that markets like India and Indonesia, who are so ahead for this activity, have some of the fastest growing online populations in the world. And this really harks back to what I said earlier about how these markets with very quickly growing internet penetration rates are more impressionable than ones in the West, for example, with mature markets having very established online activities. So there's a real chance for voice technology to imprint itself on the shape of online activities in many of these fast-growing APAC markets.
Well, it's those kind of markets that are currently driving mobile voice assistant usage. The top tier of markets for this are Indonesia, Thailand, China, and India, all of which stand noticeably above other APAC markets. At the other end of the spectrum, markets like Singapore, South Korea, and particularly Japan all post much lower figures. When we break this down by age, we can see that it's primarily the 16 to 34 age group driving mobile voice uptake, with around 40% having used a mobile voice assistant in the past month.
Let's now look over to smart speakers. Although growth has been a lot more modest in smart speaker usage in APAC, there's been growth nonetheless. So on a global level, consumers in APAC are actually among the most likely to be using smart speaker assistants, with only internet users in North America posting slightly higher figures. Compared to North America though, APAC doesn't quite match it in terms of the rate of growth for this metric. So that tells us that voice engagement might develop in a slightly different way to that seen in the West. We know from our wider research in the UK and the US that engagement tends to differ between devices and contextual environments. We tend to see that for mobile voice usage, engagement is much more based around making quick decisions and changes on the go. Whereas for smart speaker assistants, it tends to be around making around content and entertainment within a much more relaxed and interactive environment. So if internet users in APAC will primarily be using the smartphone voice interface, that could impact the overall role and purpose of voice assistants in people's everyday lives. When we put this down to a country level within APAC, we can see that Thailand, China, Philippines, and to some extent Vietnam are well ahead of other markets here. But it's really from an age-based perspective where this becomes more interesting. And it's really interesting because when we compare this to mobile voice assistant usage, we can see that the bulk of engagement when it comes to smart speakers comes from the 25 to 34 and the 35 to 44 age group. Now, for context, mobile voice assistant usage is primarily centered around the 16 to 24 age group. Now, that might be partly a result of younger internet users being much more attached to their smartphones in general, but also it could be the fact that these are household devices after all. And they could be shared between multiple users of a household, many of which may be living with their partner aged between 25 to 44.
Well, that point about differences in engagement between devices and their contextual environments is an interesting one. As it stands, voice assistants don't differentiate between devices and their contextual environments. As you say, we know from our research in the UK and US that engagement differs between device and environment, and so that adds a layer of complexity for brands looking to leverage voice and deliver a natural experience which will leave a lasting impression. I think that's a good indicator that it's still very much early days for brand engagement via voice tech. There's been a lot of talk and impressive forecasting stats surrounding how important voice assistants will be in the near future. But in order to get to that sort of status, these assistants still have some major hurdles to overcome. One of the most prominent and pressing of which, as voice gains momentum, is how to connect users with services.
Well, that seems like a fairly simple question, but there's a lot that comes with this, especially on a fundamentally new sort of interface like voice tech.
Absolutely. Voice assistants seem to be poised to incorporate advertising or product recommendations in the near future to prove their worth. But will consumers be receptive to commercial messaging delivered via voice assistants? I think one of the most obvious hurdles to commercializing these assistants is online privacy concerns. It's difficult to talk about the future of voice technology without addressing the privacy issue. All of those convenience factors which make voice assistants such an attractive proposition for both consumers and specific industries are underpinned by data collection at scale. Now, this is obviously quite a topic that's received a great deal of attention recently. What with the introduction of the GDPR in Europe, together with various high-profile privacy-related media stories in the past year, it's fair to say that many online companies are grappling with a data-driven trust deficit right now. Many of these companies are also the same brands moving headfirst, or at least considering their entry into voice technology.
But across every one of our tracked privacy concerns, from ad blocking, cookie deletion, incognito windows, and even virtual private network usage, voice tech users in APAC are well above the regional average for doing them each month. But there may not be the same level of awareness and familiarity when it comes to taking control of personal data on the voice interface. Having access to ad blockers or VPNs is now as simple as downloading an extension on a browser. And there's a wealth of these extensions to choose from too. Users can also delete cookies with the click of a button in the browser as well. But there's a lot at stake for brands in doing this right. So it's worth them asking themselves how transparency and respect concerning user privacy can be a really important part of any strong brand proposition, especially as they look to reposition themselves in light of this new interface.
Yeah, and in this post-GDPR environment, many consumers are demanding the ability to access and delete this kind of data. As many as 64% of voice tech users in APAC say they worry about how companies are using their personal data, for example. But it's worth noting here that privacy concerns form only one part of the picture. We only need to look towards the scale of ad blocking and the root causes of it to understand that a significant amount of consumers feel ads are intrusive and overabundant online and are willing to act on that frustration. So if that's the case, then how will they feel about ads or recommendations delivered via a voice interface? Ad blocking has clearly demonstrated a widespread disillusionment with the current state of online advertising, and it began to seriously boil over just as the privacy scandals and legislations of the last 12 months have increased consumer awareness of their online footprints. Now, voice assistants aren't like search engines or web pages, in they don't support lists of items very well. So any recommendations which do make it to the end user might not be perceived as truly authentic, because any recommendations which do reach that end user may have sponsorship or corporate interests behind them.
Well, so from the consumer's perspective, the question is, how do I know that this is the best and most unbiased recommendation for my current needs?
That, and also a question of whether they'll accept an unsolicited recommendation delivered using a dialogue interaction.
Interesting. And that point about voice assistants not supporting lists of items very well really cannot be overstated. That has big implications for brands. Right now, it's not ideal to be on the second or third page of Google search results, but voice assistants will funnel recommendations into a limited set of options. So put simply, for brands, they need to be front and center to gain any exposure to consumers, and that puts a lot more pressure on them. And with no such central repository of engagement and search data like we see for traditional search and search engines, there's very little clarity for brands and hard stats for them to go from in actually tackling that issue.
Well, in looking at the attitudinal responses of voice tech users, there are some very interesting outlooks on technology on the internet, which give a promising prospect on commercial messaging in voice tech. Over 70% of voice tech users in APAC say that they think there is too much choice online, with as many as 8 in 10 voice tech users in India and the Philippines saying the same. And that's really telling. It links to a wider trend in which some consumers feel very attached to technology, but are overwhelmed by the infinite shelf online. They just think there's too much choice. We only need to think back to why people are using ad blockers to realize the scale of corporate messaging vying for consumers' attention amid a vast collection of products available on retail sites. So if we do live in this economy of attention, these 2 in 3 voice tech users having second thoughts over this abundance of choice give us some idea about why voice assistants could carve out their own retail experiences.
Well, I think something at the core of that is actually personalization. Consumer journeys are increasingly diverse according to individual and personal needs.
And experiences are also at the heart of this. Amid this abundance of choice, how do brands stand out through this noise? Well, they engage people with compelling experiences.
Well, these are both areas where voice can excel, especially given that the user interface is underpinned by dialogue. Not only does that provide a much bigger opportunity to engage with consumers, but with the likes of Amazon, Google, and Alibaba pushing these interfaces towards contextually driven conversational interactions, allowing assistants to cater to individual needs and personalities. This could be key in unlocking commercial messaging on voice. Thanks very much for listening, everyone.
If you have any questions on the content of this webinar, or if you're keen to discuss anything else further, please drop us a note at trends@globalwebindex.com. And these details are also available on the Global Web Index page you use to access this webinar. A reminder that we are also offering a free 14-day trial to our platform, which you can sign up to via the webinar page, and the ability to sign up opens now until 7th of December.